Your failure in sexuality is what qualifies you to even talk to your son about sex in the first place.
Mhm.
If you as a dad had lived a perfect life sexually, you never made any mistakes, you have no brokenness, no shame in your life, no harm into your sexuality in your life, you are the wrong person. You should not talk to your son about sex.
Hey man, thank you for listening to my interview with John and Lucas Fort, the co-authors of Father-Son Accountability. We are going to talk about what it can look like for a father and son to open up to each other about deep, vulnerable topics related to sexuality, like pornography and temptation and attraction and unwanted behaviors. Now, I know that this is not easy, and some of you might be wondering, really? Is that a good idea? Can I do that with my dad, or should I do that with my son? Here's the main message that I want you to take away from this. It's a quote from their book that says, "Fathers, most sons actually start to respect their father more when we admit mistakes we have made. Sons, most fathers feel honored that their son would dare tell them something as personal as a past sexual mistake." So in this episode, you will hear a story of what it can look like for a father and a son to be allies, to have a friendship that goes deeper than surface level conversation and surface level behavior. I hope it gives you some hope for what your relationship can be like with your father or with your son or with other men, and to have wisdom about how to do this, because most of us have never done anything like this. You will hear some tips about when this type of relationship can become inappropriate, and in some cases, not possible at all. And if you do want to pursue this kind of deeper relationship with your father or with your son or with other men, there's an easy way to do it. And just by listening to this episode, you're already taking the first step. Way to go, man, and enjoy this conversation. Welcome to Husband Material. Today on the show, for the very first time, we have a father and son joining us, John Fort and Lucas Fort. Welcome to the show. You guys are the co-authors of Father-Son Accountability, Integrity Through Relationship. And today we're going to hear more about what that is. Welcome to Husband Material.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
It's great to be with you guys. Now, what do people need to know about John and Lucas?
We're both really tall. I'm Lucas. I'm 24, and I'm John's son. Live out near Portland, Oregon. And I recently am a new father. My son is almost 10 months old.
Woohoo.
So, yeah, it's going pretty good.
We got 3 generations of Fort men going here now.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
My sexual past, which Lucas alluded to, we won't go to right now, is horrific. It's way worse than anybody listening. I absolutely promise you. And then God rescued me through the help of a lot of well-trained people, counselors and supporter people and all that kind of stuff, and saved my marriage and saved everything, right? And then I was hugely grateful for that. But I grew up pre-internet. Like, porn was magazines back then, right? And so I knew what was out there. And I look at my son, look at Lucas when you're like 10 years old, like, he doesn't have a chance. There is no way this guy has a chance with what's out there. I have to do something. And I was absolutely terrified. Let me tell you, even though I can't imagine other dads, I did this for a profession. I talked about sex 40 hours a week for a profession, right? And I was still absolutely terrified to talk to Lucas. But so I get that. But I had to do something. And so I just kind of said, well, I guess we're doing this. We'll see what happens. And it did help a lot that this is what I do for work. I help guys get free from sexual addiction for a living. And so it's not like I didn't have a lot of influence, but I knew that I couldn't translate 100% of that to my kid because he's a kid and he's not an addict. And even if a teenager is looking at porn, it doesn't mean they're an addict necessarily at all.
Mhm.
We use that word, we throw that around way too much. So you can't think of it that way. And you do things, there are some differences in working with a teenager compared to working with an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was 15 years old, we went up to Washington and talked in front of a group of dads and their sons. You can bring your sons 12 and up to this thing. And they were always telling dads, talk to your son about stuff, about integrity and that kind of thing. And I was going there for work because I work in this area. And I kept thinking, they're not telling the dads what to say. They're just saying, talk to them. And so I asked Steve Delaney, he's the head of the organization, said, can my son and I just come and just show people what we do? So that's how this started. But the problem is we only had an hour and there was way too much to say. Mm-hmm. So I started writing a handout. The handout turned into the book. That's how the book started.
I like that the book is small because really the point is to put down the book and talk, right?
Yeah. And that's the whole focus is the father and son communicating with each other and kind of teaching each other.
My motivation behind this whole thing is when I started this book a long time ago, the original copy came out in 2016. There was a lot of stuff for mothers and daughters, but at that time there was nothing for fathers and sons. And especially for sons like 12 and up. And so it's like, we got to help them. So my goal was to get dads talking to their sons. And what I found is dads are terrified of talking to their sons. But once you give them just a little bit of help, they're actually really good at it. Mm-hmm. And so that's where this comes from.
Yeah, that's awesome. Lucas, why are you passionate about this topic?
Well, I'm passionate about it just from seeing how my dad is as a man, as a father, as a husband, seeing kind of where he came from and his background to where he is now and teaching other people. And to me, it's been super motivational. It's just, there's many people that have gone through similar things as him that didn't turn out doing what he is. And to me, I just have the absolute utmost respect and love for him. And so that was something for me that seeing that happen. And then on top of that is seeing how there are other fathers and sons that you could kind of tell that this information was lacking just in their own knowledge. And so kind of having that motivation of, well, hey, we talk about it. I know what we're talking about. I see what my dad's doing and how great he's doing. And it's like, well, I want to be a part of it. I want to jump in and help other people kind of be able to do what we do. Because if we came from where we came from and where my dad came from, and if we're able to be so solid, then I think anyone can.
Now, interesting, Lucas, the name of this organization is Husband Material.
Yeah.
Trying to make people better husbands. What that we talked about when you were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, we started around 11 with this stuff. Do you think made you a better husband?
Oh, well, the first and foremost, absolutely, was the emotional awareness, because that was something that we had to break down, and learning how to understand my own emotions and understand someone else's emotions as well, and how to communicate without coming across as rough or abrasive or coming across overly sweet and not hitting the point. So kind of finding that middle ground and that balance. And 100%, that's been the number one thing. Because with my wife, Lauren, that's one thing is that, her background had not nearly as good of communication. So I was kind of sort of the cornerstone for that, bringing that in and helping her learn how to do that. And of course, seeing you and Mom communicate so well has been an influence too. But definitely that emotional awareness. And that's something that we really, really harp on when we talk about the book.
Yeah. And see, that's one thing dads don't understand is the key of this is emotions. Mm-hmm. It's not sex. It's not porn. It's emotions. That's the key to the whole thing. So sexual integrity is from emotional awareness and knowing what to do with your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's not about revealing all the sexual details. It's about getting to those core emotional triggers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do have dads and sons talk about the mistakes they're making and that kind of stuff, but that's not the focus. That's not the center focus of things.
Sounds like the center is connecting at a heart level.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's why it's called integrity through relationship.
Mm-hmm.
John, you mentioned some of the fears that come up. What are some of the common fears that men have about talking with their dads or about talking with their sons?
Yeah. So we interviewed a bunch of Christian parents, including dads, and a bunch of Christian teenagers about 3 years ago. Be Broken did. And parents, so dads are included in this. The fears they have are it'll create distance between me and my son. That's one fear. It will. I'm afraid that my son will find out about my past. That's a big one. Okay, it's going to be too much work. Mom's never said that, but a lot of dads this is just too much work. That's why we did this book. We're trying to make it easy. You just read it together. It's like 10 minutes or less, and then ask each other these questions. There's no thinking involved. Uh, and so that's what dads are afraid of. Or I'll ruin my son's innocence. That's another one. We asked a bunch of Christian teenagers, this is boys and girls, but it's all the same. And it was anonymous. And they wrote in a paper, we said, why do you not talk to your parents about sex? So this includes your dad. And there was no multiple choice. They could write anything they wanted. Of all of them, there was only two things they said. They either said, my dad won't understand how I feel, or I'll get in trouble for what I say, or even for what I ask. I have a question about sex. I remember I was 9 years old, and I heard some teenage boys talking about masturbation. They didn't use that word. I don't remember what they said, but I know now that's what they were talking about. And I was afraid to ask my dad, so I tried to ask my mom, and she freaked out. She didn't get mad at me, but she was like, and I realized it is not safe. Trouble will happen if I talk to my parents about sex, if I ask them. And so I never did again. And that was the beginning of really bad things in my life, because I started going to porn and older teenage boys to ask them questions about sex. That's what kids are afraid of. What happens is when you talk the way this book is talking about, it actually makes the relationship closer, because the kid realizes, oh, my dad does understand how I feel. And when my dad tells me his messed up sexual past, then, oh, he does know what I'm feeling like, and I'm not getting in trouble. And then they end up getting closer. In fact, more than anything else, we hear dad say, this book made me and my son closer than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Lucas, what was it like for you talking with your dad about sexuality?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, number one, it all started in the backyard, because my dad's way of introducing it was, let's go do yard work. So we're doing yard work, and then, all right, so I'm going to ask you these questions. Like, oh boy. And so it kind of became that thing of, all right, dad asked me to do yard work. Well, I guess I know what we're talking about. But no, it was it was really interesting, because like he was saying, I definitely was afraid of what his reaction would be when I opened up about stuff that happened to me or that I was experiencing or feeling. But the thing was, every time that I opened up and told him exactly how I was feeling, exactly what was going on in my head, his response was always, when I mentioned earlier about the good balance of, he wasn't ever angry, even if I thought that he would be for some reason. And he wasn't also just overly like, oh, wow, oh, so touchy. It was that good balance of like showing that he cared about me, but not being upset at the same time. So doing kind of both. And the big thing for me was that, on top of him accepting everything that I said and being like, yeah, I've been validating my feelings and what's going on, he would also share info stories from his side and for things that happened to him in the past. So it's kind of like him saying, hey, you're feeling these things, that's valid. In fact, I had this experience, and kind of doubling up on it. So coming away from it, I go into it being like, oh, we're going to go do yard work and I'm going to have to talk about sex. And then it comes away from it being like, wow, no, we actually both were opening up about stuff, and we both were, it was a two-way street. It wasn't just me talking and him listening and saying, well, this is right or this is wrong. It was validating each other's feelings and what was going on, and saying, hey, I understand what's happening, basically letting me know you're not wrong for feeling this. You're not wrong for thinking this, but instead being like, okay, well, let's understand why it is you're doing what you're doing and why you're feeling it. And that was the whole premise of it. And to me, that was just mind blowing, because I was totally expecting I'm going to get, berated for whatever it is I'm feeling or thinking. And yeah.
We talked a lot about feelings, not just what you're doing. So even things like fantasy and stuff like that, which a lot of dads leave out. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't look at porn recently. Well, so, I mean, what else is, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in your head, and you're thinking, right, am I a freak because this is happening to me?
Yeah. It's important to note, this is not the porn police checking up on bad behavior and keeping track of how good it's been or how bad it's been. This is going deeper into the inner world, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly right. I mean, when I was a teenager in middle school, and we had been talking about sex and about different emotions and stuff for a while, and I remember I came home and I'm like, oh man, I messed up. I totally dropped the ball, horrible stuff. And, I'm sure my dad was probably thinking like, oh, what happened? Did he fantasize, look at porn? What happened? And I'm like, there was a girl that was wearing short shorts, and I caught myself looking at her, and I had looked away and I felt so bad. And he's like, well, what'd you do with those feelings? Did you do? I'm like, well, no, I just looked away, but I felt bad that I even noticed. He's like, well, okay, you're a man. This biologically, that's okay. That's what happens. And so that was the whole thing, is like, me even feeling comfortable. And there could be boys out there, young men that feel bad because they do something as minor as that. And they feel, oh no, I messed up. I'm so horrible. I'm impure, when that's simply not the case. And so and I wouldn't have brought that up to him and talked about it if it weren't for our communication and our, communal emotional awareness and everything. That wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah. When that happened, it occurred to me that what he'd experienced was a biological reaction. His body was reacting to seeing an attractive girl that had a lot of skin showing, right? And so, and he thinks, well, that must be bad, right? Because we're not supposed to. And in a flash, it all kind of came to me. Well, there's a biological reaction, then there's sexual temptation, and then there's giving in to lust. And I said, the biological reaction is good and normal. Maybe we should celebrate. Everything's working the way it's supposed to, right? And then temptation is, yes, maybe you're tempted to keep recalling that and imagine her naked, or masturbate to thinking about it, or go look at porn or whatever. That's temptation. But even those thoughts are even Jesus was tempted, right? I imagine when Jesus was a teenager, he had similar temptations, right? Then there is giving into that. And so it's like, when you delineate that, and I realized that even helped me, that discussion helped me realize, oh, when I feel a biological reaction, I don't have to feel shame about that. And if I'm tempted, I don't have to feel shame about that. And by doing that, it prevents me. It's less likely that I will give in to lust when I realize this is just normal. It's okay. I don't have to freak out about this. And so that conversation helped me, I think, as much as it helped him, because I'd never really thought about it until a 13-year-old asked me that question.
Mm-hmm.
I love how your relationship and the foundation that you build allowed Lucas to let go of that shame. Because what usually happens is we carry the shame and it sticks to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were able to let it go. I mean, that's just so beautiful that you had this honesty, vulnerability, trust that was built. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from the book. You cannot feel truly loved when you are not fully known.
I got that from my boss, Jonathan Doherty, by the way. That quote is not from me. I'm quoting my boss. So now this happened because we started before puberty, when he was younger. You can't, this would be much harder, don't you think, if you waited until 13, 14, 15 I mean, a lot of dads don't hear this until their son's that age. We help dads with teenage boys start these conversations, and it's still great. But there's less to unlearn the younger you start with this stuff. So like 10, 11, 12 or whatever, somewhere in there is there's other conversations you should be having before this that this is not. So.
Well, and especially because what you told me before is that the average age that people are exposed to pornography is getting younger. And so it's like, if kids are younger getting exposed to that kind of stuff, that doesn't mean, well, they're 6 or 7, I can't even think about talking to this until they're 10, 11, 12. It's like, no, it's okay to start, introducing the emotional awareness stuff for sure. That isn't, you can have intentions of talking about, sex and pornography and everything like that later, but having the emotional awareness begins as early as you can.
And we did, Mom and I talked with both you and your sister about emotional from really little. Because when I went through therapy, my therapist said, you don't even understand emotions at all.
So I'm guessing we have some fathers listening to this, thinking about their sons, maybe their young sons or adult sons. And I'm guessing that we have some sons listening to this who might be adults, and yet they have never really connected with their fathers about this. So for a father with his son, when does this kind of relationship become inappropriate?
So Jeremy Keaton, who's the head of counseling at Focus on the Family, helped me the most with this. It can become invasive where the dad's invading the son's privacy, right? If the son doesn't want to talk about it, you have to back off, right? We did talk about masturbation, that kind of stuff. You have to be careful about that, because if a kid doesn't want to talk about it, then they shouldn't have to, But if a kid wants, there's kind of like there's a level of detail that we don't need to be talking about it. If that makes sense. Um, we don't even need to say like when it's happened. For example, with Lucas and I, it's like I said, I'm not going to be telling you when I have sex with mom. And you don't have to tell me that if you do masturbate, I don't want to know like what day it was. I don't need to know. We don't need to know that kind of. Let's keep a little bit of that kind of stuff, and we don't need to know details. There were times when Lucas actually. This is actually pretty common when I've worked with young men. Is the way a person masturbates becomes like embarrassing to them. It's like, is this normal? I did that, and Lucas did that, and I've had other young men do that too. And it's like I kind of stop him. It's like I don't need to know. I don't want you to paint a picture of that in my head. But at the same time that's been done 1,000 times by a ton of other people. Like you didn't invent that. So there's there that kind of thing. But it's that type of detail you don't want to get too much into, because then you're almost bridging into illegal territory at that point in time. Adult, as far as the minor adult kind of relationships, you have to be careful about that kind of stuff.
Another thing that you mentioned is that the term accountability can be confusing. Like a father depending on his son to be his accountability partner doesn't feel appropriate. So what would you recommend?
So you as a dad need to have your own adult accountability partner. Lucas knew I went to support group. He even knew some of the men who were my support network. He knew them personally. He knew who they were, what did you feel about that? I had those relationships. How did that make you feel?
It was a good thing in my mind because in the same way that I was going to you to talk about what I was feeling and everything, I kind of viewed it the same way for you. Mm-hmm. So when you would go and say, I'm going to my group or whatever, I knew that you were going to be talking to people about different issues or different thoughts you've been having and everything in the same way that I'd go to you. And so I never felt like, oh, he's not sharing stuff with me. I kind of felt like it was good because I felt like my relationship with my dad was more so, we're sharing with each other, but it's focused on me. But then he has his network where it's focused on him. And so I feel like it was that kind of, I kind of understood that. Maybe I didn't put those words together in my head, but I understood that was what was going on.
I didn't want him to ever feel like, oh, dad's got this issue. I don't know what to say to him to help him. I have that outside. That pressure is not on him. Another thing is, don't share with your kid anything that you wouldn't also share with your wife. Or especially like, well, don't tell mom, but, you know what I'm saying? Now, there was a time when Lucas talked to both my wife and I, and then he got to a certain age and said, I only want to talk to dad now. It's not that anything he told me was like, mom can't know this more. Just I kind of feel more comfortable if just we're talking about this. It's not that it's a secret, right? And so that's the kind of thing but you don't ever want to put a kid in the position of, something that mom can't know. This is not the secret club, right? If that makes sense.
That's right.
So those kind of things, that's true. I'm glad you brought that out, is that I have to have my own accountability, and my son needs to realize somebody else is taking care of that. I'm still sharing when I'm tempted. I'm still sharing when I have trouble with fantasy. I'm still sharing slips and things like I have, but not to the extent. So for example, if I was having some kind of temptation, I reach out to my network. At some point later, maybe I might say, yeah, I've had some issues with temptation this week, but I'm just doing that so he knows that's a normal thing. Not that I'm trying to put that on him.
Right.
Does that make sense?
You are always focused on serving your son rather than your son feeling like it's his burden to care for you.
Right, right.
Yep. Well, and then that kind of translated over, and also seeing my dad going to his network of people. To me, since we had been doing this kind of stuff and talking about it for so long, later in high school, I even had a couple other accountability partners that I'd go to as well. Maybe because kind of going away towards the point of, okay, once I become an adult, maybe I still talk to my dad, still share stuff with him, but going to the point of, well, I have my own partners and my own network. And so I started that even as early as like late high school, having another high school friend or someone who's maybe in my church that was an older person, like in the youth group or whatever it may be, and kind of going that direction. And I mean, that definitely stemmed off of seeing my dad. Well, he has his own network of people he goes to, so I ought to start having my own at some point.
Yeah. I do. And I actually encouraged him to do that when you were like 16, 17, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I encourage dads to do that too. It's like, your son should not feel like he's locked to you. As he gets older, before he leaves, it'd be nice if he has other people he talks to about this. So he can experience that and not expect when he moves out, all of a sudden he just has to figure that out.
Not everyone is like I am in this sense. I'm a very outgoing people person, but even this experience and starting having other accountability partners that were similar to my age in high school, that translated to now in my working life and in my career is I even talk to coworkers and start getting the ball rolling on talking about different subjects, be it religion or the whole or sexuality or whatever. And that's one thing that I enjoy is kind of getting people to feel like they don't have to bottle stuff up. And if someone ends up wanting to be open with me and everything, great. If not, no worries. And I keep it work appropriate, but I still feel like I try to kind of bring those conversations and that openness and everything anywhere.
You crack me up. You'll know somebody for 20 minutes and get them talking about their porn use.
Usually it stems off because I'll misspeak sometimes. I'll be like, "Oh, what does your dad do?" I'm like, "Oh, he works in the porn industry." I mean, no, he doesn't work. He gets people away from porn. Sorry, that's not. Yeah. And usually they're like, "What now?"
So you've been doing this for years. You've been training people on how to form really deep, meaningful father-son relationships that are healing and growing and developing sexual maturity. What are some of the most important tips to keep in mind?
I think one of the most important things to me, at least, is to understand that this is not about like punishing bad behavior. So when any father's opening up to their son or any son's opening up to their father, it's not about pointing out, well, you did this thing wrong, and we're going to focus on that. Like that's definitely a big one. That's something I've seen. And I know that my dad's seen as well a lot is fathers, getting used to, well, we're trying to get rid of the bad behavior, right? It's like, well, no, it's trying to lead them into good behaviors and learning how to do other things that are healthy and better for themselves rather than this, and understanding that what they're doing is biologically okay and good, in fact, but we're not trying to punish them wanting to do these things. And I think that's something that's really important. Big tip.
Yeah, the relationship is more important than behavior. So all teenage boys are going to struggle with their sexuality. None of us adult men manage our sexuality perfectly, and neither will our sons. Okay, but the relationship is important, because let's say that your son struggles and never really does very well. If you ruin your relationship over that, then what have you got? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I've had dads who've gone through Gateway to Freedom, which is B. Broken's men's intensive weekend for recovery from sex and porn addiction, and who've had sons in their 20s and bought this book and gone and done this with their 25, 26-year-old. Okay, because they said, I never did this with my son and I want to, right? But they can do that because they didn't destroy the relationship. So you can still help your son after he's 18 if you maintain the relationship. And so that's the big thing is that has to come first. It doesn't mean you just say, well, whatever you do, son, is fine. That's not what you're saying. But whatever that means for you and your son, that has to be the most. So you got to invest in that relationship a ton.
Another part of that too is what I was talking about of, not getting upset at the bad behavior. But on top of that is, leaving room for your son, whatever age he is that if there's a way that the father is communicating that the son doesn't like, is asking, okay, so, how do you feel about this? How did that make you feel? And if the son ends up saying, I really don't like the way that this is making me feel, I don't like the way that you're talking about this or this kind of thing, is having the room as a dad to understand, okay, I need to back off a little bit. Or, maybe the son is saying, well, I feel like you're lecturing me rather than helping me, and that kind of stuff. So being open to criticism from your son, and, like my dad was saying, not letting that ruin the relationship, is being willing to be, okay, well, we're both learning, and,
And also being willing to apologize.
Yeah.
One of the most healing things my dad ever said to me was that he did a really lousy job of teaching me about sexuality. And when I heard him say that, I just wept and melted into his arms and hugged him. I mean, that apology those words, "I'm sorry," from your dad are so huge, even if it's for something little.
Mm.
The reason I say that is because sometimes we feel a pressure to do it perfectly, when in fact, making mistakes, apologizing, and repairing those ruptures is actually really important. So
Right.
without the imperfection, we can actually miss out on deeper connection.
Well, the thing is the son is going to mess up somehow in some way, right? And if he doesn't see his dad mess up, he will feel like my dad can't relate to me. So if the messing up is just like I do something in my communication that's not good, and then say, "Man, I am really sorry about that. I'm not perfect either." It's that not perfect either that bonds people together.
It's so helpful. That's just so liberating to realize that my weakness and my own mistakes are actually what qualify me and what allow me to relate.
Because the relationship is important, and the way the relationship is built is over our mutual brokenness. That's where we connect. Do you want to connect over, I did it right this week, I did it right this week? No, I did it wrong this week, I did it wrong this week. That's where the connection happens.
It's so good.
Because sometimes the yard work gets boring when everyone's doing well, you know.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I didn't realize I was doing that, but he gives me a hard time. Apparently, that's what I did from the time he was like 11 years old or 10 or something. And so I do say this to dads. Speaking of that, when you have a conversation with your son about emotions or sex, do not sit looking at each other.
Yeah.
Don't do that. The reason I did the yard work is because we would not be looking at each other when we're doing that. So you need to be sitting where you're like looking kind of in the same direction or a different whatever, kind of thing.
Yeah, otherwise it just feels like an interview, and pulling up your resume of your sexual past and stuff. It's like, well, that's not.
So side by side works better than face to face.
Yeah.
Yep.
Another thing is you can do it like during a car ride because they can't get out, and they're stuck.
I didn't expect me to feel relief from this, but one of the things that was very relieving as a young boy was going through puberty, and my dad telling me, like, when you go, because has a biology major, and one of the things he talked about is when you go through puberty, your hormone levels just shoot through the roof by like hundreds and hundreds of percent going through puberty, shooting up. And so sometimes you have a teenager that will do something and you ask, well, why'd you do that? Why'd you feel that way? I don't know. And when they say I don't know, they're telling the truth. And that was one of the things that I didn't expect to be freeing when I was younger, but it was nice to be like, because I'd feel stuck sometimes if he asked me a question and I'm trying to come up with some answer that might not actually be true. But him telling me, like, oh, well, that's like that. It makes sense that you don't know. If my hormone levels were jumping like that too, I wouldn't know either.
Yeah.
And so it's like that was, one of the things as well, for sure.
The first year of puberty, nothing works. The hormone levels go up, depending on what research you look at, anywhere between 1,500 and 4,000% in like a year. And that's a tidal wave. And the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain that helps you moderate both your feelings and your sex drive, doesn't fully develop till you're 25. And so you've got somebody with the foot in the gas full on, and there's no brakes. And so the first year of puberty, all the stuff that a kid does, it isn't about emotions. It isn't. I was teaching Lucas about which core emotions is going to be your trigger. The first year of puberty, everything's a trigger. It's like you are a trigger. You know what I'm saying? So like that first year, you're just trying to get through that. And so I had taught him about the emotional stuff, but that 1 year, like none of it made any sense. Like almost to the day, a year after, it started to make sense. Oh, wait. I'm realizing that when I have this feeling, I'm more likely to be tempted or want to act out, right? But that year of puberty, just throw it all out the window. We got the foot in the gas. We're just trying, not to get in a wreck. So if you think about it that way, like, we're going to do the best we can.
Yeah, it's validating.
Yeah, it was.
Lucas, at this point, you are in your 20s, you're a husband, you're a father. Looking back, what is the result in your life now because of your relationship with your dad?
Well, I mean, I don't think I would be nearly as good of a husband or father or anything if it weren't for the relationship that I have with my dad and all that communication. Like I talked about, the number one thing I've taken away is that communication and the understanding of emotions. It was one thing where, you know, seeing him and my mom and how they raised my sister and I and how they got along well as a couple. When I was like 16 or something, I just randomly decided my lifelong goal is to be the best husband and father I can. And it wasn't, people talk about careers and stuff in high school. I'm like, I don't care what I do for a career as long as I'm there for my family and I'm good with them and we all love each other. Like that's the most important thing. And I wouldn't have felt that way if it weren't for everything my dad and I did and talked about. And so that emotional awareness and that communication and having that solidity as a family really molded me into who I am now and who I want to be. Um, and I know my dad's mentioned it before. I know everyone's goal as a parent is to be better than your parents. And that's a pretty high bar because my parents were pretty fantastic. But I think, yeah, that 100% is the reason I am who I am now is because of everything that we've talked about and all that. I mean, like I said before, I wouldn't be talking to coworkers that I've only talked to for an hour about, you know, their emotions and sex and religion and all that kind of stuff if it weren't for all that communication and all that emotional awareness and stuff. And I, I'm not going to try to toot my own horn or anything, but I feel like I present myself to other people as a pretty solid emotional person with a really good foundation. And that all stems from everything that my dad and I have done and talked about.
I would say to anybody who's not a dad yet, dude, start working on your emotions to get ready to be a good husband and a good dad.
Yep. And then the thing is too, there's no weakness in being, you know, not perfect. There's no weakness in, you know, not being emotionally solid and aware and everything like that. Like that doesn't make you less of a man, doesn't make you less of a husband or father or whatever it may be. And so, yeah, what he's talking about, it's like, I mean, that's the thing. My dad already being a husband and a father of two was realizing, you know, oh, I'm broken in this way and I need to get help. And so it's like, you know, that's if somebody who's already a father and a husband is doing that kind of thing and having that feelings, then there's no reason why you shouldn't start doing it before.
And hopefully it will become more normal for dads and sons to talk and connect and to have an appropriate and supportive relationship, especially with our sexual imperfection.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
John, how has your relationship with Lucas affected you?
What's so awesome is how it has paid off and that Lucas wants to spend time with me. We see each other at least once a week, you know, and usually more often than that. It's like, I wish I could have had that relationship with my dad. Unfortunately, he had early onset Alzheimer's. So, you know, the way my recovery worked and with his, we never kind of got to connect at that level. But the fact that I can connect that level with Lucas and with my daughter as well is amazing. It's just like I can't believe it. Almost seems like this is not real. Like there'll be times when you come over and you hug me and you talk to me and you're just like this and you'll leave and I was like, how is this happening? Because it's just like you don't see this happening. Most of my friends that have kids the age of Lucas, like they don't have this kind of relationship at all. And sometimes I'm like afraid to talk to them because they start feeling ashamed that their relationship with their adult kids is just okay, you know. But you know, this is like we're who we want to hang around with. It's just really unusual. It's like, and at Lucas's age, he's more, you know, we're kind of more friend like, you know what I'm saying? You do different stages of parenting, and you get to this stage, and it's like, I don't give him advice hardly ever anymore. He doesn't need advice anymore. We just hang out and have fun and talk. We still talk about our feelings and things like that because why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, very few people know me as well as Lucas at this point, and who can say that about their son? Really, it really seems almost surreal sometimes, if that makes sense. Like, how can this be? And then now we have Elias, his son, which is awesome, and so like there, you know, and Elias is picking up on all this emotion already, picking up on all this emotion. He's surrounded by emotionally healthy people as a baby. Oh my gosh, who knows what he's going to be like?
Yeah. Probably be huge too.
Tall, just like his dad and just like his granddad.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean,
He's already huge. So yeah, it runs in the family. I'm actually not that tall for a fort.
What about for a son who's listening, longing for emotional connection with his dad? They've never talked about sex, or when they have, it's been uncomfortable. If a son wants to initiate with his father, what would you recommend?
First off, obviously talking and getting together with them for a kind of, mutual interest reason, be it, we're going fishing or whatever, kind of in a different setting than at home. I feel like that kind of escape where you're outside doing something, like we talk about when we have conversations, getting out, going to a walk, going fishing, whatever it is. But actually starting it up, talking about more just like, I guess, basic emotions, in the sense of not going straight into, oh, so this is, I looked at pornography the other day. It's like, well, maybe start off first with going into like, this thing at work or this thing happening in my life is making me feel this positive way, and this thing's making me feel this kind of negative way, and kind of opening up of like, I have these kind of negative feeling about this, dad, what's your thought on that? What do you think about that? And kind of getting them involved in some of the more baseline stuff. And over time, slowly opening up more and more and introducing more emotions and stuff. And I feel like for some people, depending on the person, some fathers I know can be a little hardened and a little kind of closed off, like I don't share my emotions because I'm a man, that whole thing. And I feel like some of it might even have to start with, well, as a son, I'm going to start introducing some of this emotions. And after a number of times getting together, then I introduce like, oh, well, dad, how do you feel about this? Or what's going on in your life? What about this? And kind of starting off from that place and kind of building up from there.
I think you're right. I think the way to start is talk about feelings and just kind of basic feelings, like good, bad. Don't get all in depth. We tell parents, don't talk to your kids about sex until you've talked to them about feelings. Because feelings is the training ground. Sex is too personal. Feelings are personal, but not as personal as sex. So that's a training ground for talking about personal things. But the reality of it is there are going to be some dads who just can't, because they have too much brokenness in their life. They have too much pain in their life. And sometimes men cover that up by being funny and joking. I have a friend who's older than me that I know his story, and he's got a ton of pain, not about sex, but just pain in his past. And his way of dealing with it is to never, if the conversation ever starts to get serious, he immediately starts telling jokes. And so, but sometimes that's the best people can do. And we have to also accept people like that's the best we can do. Now, if you're a son, like an adult age son, and you're trying these things, and you need someone to talk to, it may not be your dad. And that's a really sad thing, but that's what with me. I never was able to talk with my dad about this kind of stuff. I had to have accountability partners to help me.
And from my own experience, I would also say, even if it happens to be reaching out to a coworker, if it happens to be reaching out to, maybe you're in some kind of sport club and you're reaching out to someone there, I think you might be surprised how many men are willing to talk about it.
It is a lie that men are bad about talking about feelings. My experience shows that men actually can be better than women about talking about our feelings once we start doing it. Men can be extremely good about talking about feelings. It's not a male thing, it's a cultural thing. I lived in Brazil for 2 years when I was younger, and men there talk about their feelings all the time. It is completely a cultural issue. It has nothing to do with male genes or anything like that.
That's so good. That's so profound. We can learn this stuff. We can grow even if we were never taught.
Absolutely, you can do this. It's just that we just think we can't. We get afraid because we've never seen it done.
Yeah.
It takes a redemptive risk to step out and reverse the curse of being underfathered. Reverse the curse of shame and silence and fear, so that we can help each other outgrow porn and be sexually whole.
Here's the crazy thing, Drew, that talking to Lucas about feelings and sex is what made our relationship amazing. I know lots of dads that have sons, 12 to 15, 18, whatever, somewhere in there. And some of the ones who talk with their sons about feelings and sex are way closer to their kids than the ones who don't.
Mhm.
And everything else, they go to church, they do all stuff like that, they do things together, they talk. But when you leave the personal aspect out, it just cuts the relationship off at the knees to what it can be.
Mhm.
There's this night and day difference in relations between dads and their sons when they talk about feelings. Number one is feelings, and then number two, sexuality.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's the thing, because in the Bible, I mean, Jesus talks about how, marriage and, having sex basically is one of the closest things to feeling what it's like to be with him. And it's like, and we're talking about that emotional thing, we're talking about the most intense emotional thing that we can experience. And so if it makes sense to me, of course, dude, that would bring you closer together.
It's so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying is we can develop it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the funny thing is dads fear talking to their sons about sex because it's going to be hard and ruin the relationship. When in fact, it's the thing that makes your relationship better than it ever could be any other way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, John. Okay, Lucas. What is your favorite thing about freedom from porn?
Just the lack of shame. I was addicted to sexuality, not just porn, but all this stuff, masturbation, fantasy, everything, all that kind of stuff, since I was like 11 years old, right? And being able to go to church, being able to be in a conversation and saying, I haven't done that since way back when. And like that lack of shame to me is that freedom. When you hear freedom, it's like, it's not that looking at porn defines you or destroys whatever, it's like, it's the freedom to say, wow, I don't have that thing hanging over my head all the time now.
Yeah. I'd say for me, honestly, it's the freedom to be able to focus on other things in my life is not being able to focus on my wife, being able to focus on my son, and not having something else that's, eating away at me and trying to get in there. And then even when temptations come up, being able to knowing how to and being able to talk about it, address the feelings and the emotions. And, and at this point, after doing it for so many years, when a temptation arises, being able to be like, oh yeah, I understand that. This is why I'm feeling that way. Cool. Okay. I'll text this person, talk about it. Cool. Back to what I'm doing. And it's just nice to having that freedom to be able to not have that intrude on all the other aspects of my life. Because number of times I talk to other people and hear other men and everything where, it definitely is a burden to them and getting in the way of other things and taking up time. And yeah, just, it's nice to not have that hanging over my head.
It's so good. And as counterintuitive as it may sound, fathers and sons can be a part of that together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So thank you for writing this book, guys. If you want to get a copy of Father-Son Accountability, you can go down to the link in the show notes and connect with John and Lucas as well. Thanks so much for being here.
Of course. Thanks you
for
very
having
much.
us.
Yeah.
And gentlemen, always remember, you are God's beloved son. In you, he is well pleased.